Say you live in the Borderlands universe and are remarkably average. You have no skill trees, fancy gear, or vault hunting capabilities whatsoever. All you want to do is settle down and start a new life. So, where should you live? The Borderlands universe has no shortage of planets to choose from, but given how dangerous everything is, you'll have to choose carefully. Well, fret not, because in this video, I'll be going over the best and worst planets to live on to help you make an informed decision. Spoiler alert, they almost all suck. Before we begin, a few ground rules. First, I'm only including planets that actually have meaningful lore. If a planet is only mentioned once in a throwaway line, like Hera, Themis, or Artemis, it's not making the list. Second, habitable moons count. And finally, I'll be ranking everything from worst to best, judged entirely by Borderlands standards. So, with that out of the way, let's begin. It was a close debate for the worst place to live, but in the end, Pandora's former moon, Elpis, takes the bottom spot. Let's start with the pros. Living in low gravity is a fun novelty, and the views are genuinely incredible. And that's about it. Everything else about Elpis is aggressively inhospitable. The most glaring issue is the atmosphere, or rather, lack thereof. Elpis used to be breathable until Dahl established mining colonies to extract liquid methane from the moon. Those operations destabilized Elpis's thin crust, triggering what's now known as the Krakening, where massive portions of the surface collapsed and filled with lava. Instead of attempting to fix any of this, Dahl did what it does best, which is leave the moment things get complicated and unprofitable. The result is one of the most brutal environments in the entire Borderlands universe. As a result, everyone living on Elpis is forced to wear an Oz kit just to move around, and even those only carry enough oxygen for short trips between oxygen geysers and fields. And even if the lack of breathable air doesn't kill you, something else almost certainly will. Nearly everything on Elpis is actively trying to end your life. The wildlife alone is lethal, ranging from molten kragans to spider-like torques to flying cephalopods known as sugar rats. And somehow, the humans manage to make it even worse. Moon bandits, known as scavs, constantly raid and prey on anyone they can just to survive. But the biggest problem is the Lost Legion. In an effort to keep the secrets of the Vault of Elpis hidden, they decided the safest option was to destroy the moon entirely. So, on top of everything else, you have to avoid a giant space laser fired from the Eye of Helios. If you somehow manage to survive all this, your best case scenario is reaching the only place on Elpis that resembles civilization, Concordia. While it's technically a city, Concordia began as a Dahl spaceport, and it shows. There isn't much to do. There's Moxxi's nightclub, and not a whole lot else. And while it isn't lawless like much of Borderlands, its so-called government is run by Huckster, the widely disliked and deeply corrupt Marif. So, even in the best case scenario, you wouldn't really be living on Elpis. You'd just be surviving, confined to a sleepy city, killing time simply because it's marginally better than dying. And even that fragile version of survival doesn't last. At the end of Borderlands 3, Lilith phases Elpis into Kairos, shattering part of the moon and throwing what little stability it had into total chaos. And if you were hiding out in Concordia, congratulations, you're now scavenging for resources alongside everyone else, competing with scavs, rippers, and order just to stay alive. So, all in all, life on Elpis is catastrophically dangerous. If you move here for some godforsaken reason, you're probably already dead. And even if you survive, your existence would be so miserable that you'll wish you hadn't. It's so bad that Borderlands 4 even jokes about it. You can find an echo called Therapy Session where a man named Carl vents to his therapist about how many disasters have struck Elpis, and wonders if humans were ever meant to live there at all. And right before the session ends, Elpis gets teleported into Kairos. Carl was right. No one should live on Elpis. And for that reason, Elpis earns a 1 out of 10 for livability. On to the next planet. Surely it has to be better than Elpis, right? Well, barely. Xylourgos is a frigid tundra locked in a perpetual eclipse, since its sister planet permanently blocks out the sun. It's also home to a supernatural vault monster known as Githian, whose presence warps nearly every aspect of life on the planet, turning it into a Lovecraftian horror minus the overt racism. If, for some reason, you decide to live on Xylourgos, you really only have 3 options, none of which are appealing. First is Cursehaven, which is controlled by Eleanor, Vincent, and the Bonded. Living here guarantees you'll be cursed, and these aren't mild inconveniences. Curses range from memory loss to eternal dancing to completely losing your sense of gravity. You're technically alive, but you're also being actively tortured 24 hours a day. If that doesn't sound appealing, your second option is to brave the cold and hostile wildlife like Wolven and Critches and live among the Frostbiter clans. This means you'll be hunting for survival for the rest of your life in a frozen wasteland with no real infrastructure to fall back on. And if neither of those appeal to you, your final option is the Lodge, run by its proprietor, Mancubus Bloodtooth, who strongly encourages guests to stay forever. The Lodge is warm, relatively safe, and appears to ward off curses, but it's also a life permanently confined to one building, under the watch of someone who is, at best, deeply unsettling. At worst, Mancubus is nefarious, as he seems to be quietly pulling the strings behind many of the events on Xylourgos. So even if you move to Xylourgos after the Vault Hunters defeat Eleanor and Vincent, the future still isn't particularly appealing, or guaranteed to be curse-free. Living on Xylourgos is ultimately a matter of picking your poison. So if Elpis earns a 1 out of 10 for livability, Xylourgos isn't much better. Let's call it a 1.5 out of 10. Thankfully, there's nowhere to go but up. Next up is Nekrotafeyo. If you enjoy ancient history, can handle some dangerous wildlife, and don't mind a deeply solitary existence, Nekrotafeyo isn't the worst place to live. In its prime, it was once home to the Iridians, a civilization that vanished from the galaxy long ago. The planet is still littered with their ruins and ancient technology. Of course, appreciating any of that history requires you to survive the wildlife. Millennia have passed since the Iridians disappeared, and nature has reclaimed much of the planet, so expect frequent attacks from large, aggressive insectoid creatures. And if you want to explore the ruins themselves, you'll have to contend with Iridian Guardians and Malawan. Still, if you're resourceful, you can carve out a relatively safe existence here, especially if you settle somewhere remote like the area Typhon de Leon once lived. It wouldn't be a very stimulating life unless you genuinely enjoy exploration and danger. And you might also be a little unsettled living on a planet haunted by the billions of souls sacrificed to power the Iridian machine. But if none of that bothers you, it could be worse. Just make sure that if you have kids, you're a good parent. Otherwise, they might grow up to be very annoying. Nekrotafeyo earns a 3 out of 10 for livability. Now, if you've been paying close attention to the Borderlands series, you might have noticed a very subtle, reoccurring theme. Capitalism might be a little bad. Corporations constantly wage war, turn planets into wastelands, ruin countless lives in the pursuit of shareholder profit. You know the drill. Well, no planet embodies this brand of late-stage capitalism better than Eden 5. If the name rings a bell, it's because it's actually Gage's homeworld that she had to flee after her death trap incident. For a long time, the residential moon wasn't very fleshed out. That changed with the release of Borderlands Dead or Alive in June 2024, a novel written by Anthony Birch that serves as a direct sequel to Tales from the Borderlands, picking up directly after Fiona and Sasha's story. I'll keep the plot spoilers to a minimum in case you're interested in reading it, but in short, Eden 5 operates on extreme income inequality. One district houses the ultra-wealthy who live in complete safety and spend their days attending lavish parties. The rich effectively run the planet, having paid off both law enforcement and security bots. As a result, the laws are intentionally absurd and designed to keep the rest of the population permanently in debt. Even minor infractions can result in someone's wrist or neck being fitted with a debt collar, which are bulky, extremely heavy devices meant to physically weigh people down as they work to pay off what they owe. The poorer residents are forced to work long hours for minimal pay, trapped in a cycle of debt that benefits the elite. And these collars don't just affect working-age adults. There are also numerous examples of elderly people and even children wearing multiple collars at once. Meanwhile, the billionaires exploiting them could pay off those debts without so much as noticing a dent in their accounts, but they view the poorest beneath them in nothing but cheap labor. Anyone trapped in debt is confined to a slum known as Rustville, where people live in overcrowded communal housing, often without proper shelter, and are forced to scavenge just to eat. On the plus side, Eden 5 is physically safe. There's no dangerous wildlife here and no roaming groups of bandits trying to shoot you on sight. But the trade-off is that your life here would be so bleak and oppressive that it barely feels worth living. For that reason, Eden 5 earns a 3.5 out of 10 for livability. Next, we finally go to where it all started, Pandora. Given how terrible Pandora's reputation is, I was honestly surprised it ranked this high. But to be fair, that reputation is well earned. Pandora is a lawless, extremely dangerous planet that's been ravaged by corporate interference for decades. Companies like Dahl, Atlas, and Hyperion have repeatedly carved it up, abandoned it, and left it in a near-constant state of turmoil. As a result, the people of Pandora live in a near-constant state of fight or flight. On any given day, you can expect to dodge aggressive wildlife like skags and racks, stray gunfire from bandits, or the occasional corporate missile strike. And if all of that somehow isn't enough, Pandora was also designed to be the Great Vault, a massive prison for the universe-ending entity known as the Destroyer. While the Destroyer itself mostly lies dormant, emerging only once every 200 years to consume a handful of unlucky souls, its presence makes Pandora one of the most important, and most dangerous, places in the galaxy. Power seekers are constantly drawn to the planet in search of Iridian technology, resulting in repeated catastrophic events. In just the last few decades, Pandora has endured the Destroyer, the Warrior, the Traveler, and Tyrene Calypso, all of which caused massive destruction and nearly wiped the planet out entirely. And yet, despite all of this, Pandora has real upsides. It's one of the few places in the Borderlands universe where, if you're resourceful enough, you can actually have the freedom to become something more. There are also places where you can temporarily escape the chaos. Underground settlements known as Undercities, like Hollow Point, allow people to avoid much of the surface level danger. And if living underground isn't your thing, there are surface settlements that remain relatively safe for long stretches of time. They shift over the years, but places like Firestone, New Haven, and Sanctuary are typically filled with people trying to make an honest living and work towards a shared goal. You can also rely on vault hunters to handle a lot of the planet's worst problems, assuming you can offer them something worthwhile in return. And despite being a barren wasteland, Pandora can actually be surprisingly beautiful in its own way. Pandora is awful, but it's awful in a way that gives you agency, and in the Borderlands universe, that goes a long way. For that reason, Pandora earns a 4 out of 10 for livability. The next planet is nearly the polar opposite of Pandora. Debuting in Borderlands 4, Kairos is a world tucked away in a distant corner of the galaxy. For centuries, it remained hidden from the wider universe, until Lilith's teleportation of Elpis caused it to collide with Kairos' veil, exposing the planet to outsiders. Where Pandora is lawless and chaotic, Kairos, at least in its prime, was safe, orderly, and extremely controlled. Its ruler, the Timekeeper, believed deeply in cosmic order, and more importantly, that humanity needed to be controlled at all costs. With the help of Zadra, the Timekeeper created bolts, neural implants embedded in the neck that allowed him to override the minds and bodies of Kairos' population. This transformed Kairos into the ultimate totalitarian surveillance state, where dissent could be instantly detected and eliminated. People lived tightly structured lives, governed by strict curfews and rigid social expectations, with almost no freedom to choose their own paths. And because most of Kairos' residents had crash-landed on the planet, many were permanently cut off from their homeworlds, friends, and families, unable to contact them at all. To live on Kairos was to be micromanaged, and to live in constant fear of losing your sense of agency. Despite these oppressive conditions, Kairos did have its upsides. Humans were allowed to develop their own cultures, art, and traditions. At its peak, Dominion City was said to be beautiful and meticulously ordered. Kairos also maintained a defined class structure. The Electi thrived, able to accumulate wealth and social status, while the Augurs of the Frigid Terminus range developed their own distinct culture. Though most Augurs are forced to mine Ordinite, they still preserved rich fables, art, and a strong sense of purpose. And while no one wants to live without freedom, for centuries, life on Kairos offered something rare in the Borderlands universe: long-term stability and community. That stability collapsed when Elpis teleported into Kairos, turning Carcadia into a desert and forcing the Timekeeper to divert resources against Ripper attacks. This caused the once great Dominion City to fall into ruin, but in the grand scope of Kairos' history, this period was relatively brief, lasting only 6 years. More importantly, it gave the people of Kairos the opportunity to organize and form a resistance. Now, in the aftermath of Borderlands 4, Kairos stands at a crossroads. The Timekeeper is gone, leaving behind a power vacuum that could easily invite corporate exploitation or another dictator entirely. But, for the moment, Kairos has won its freedom and retains a surprisingly solid foundation to rebuild on. Because of that, Kairos earns a 5 out of 10 for livability, though that score is very much subject to change depending on future DLC. Next is Eden 6, another one of Eden's moons. In many ways, it resembles Nekrotafeyo. It's largely undeveloped and has wildlife so dangerous that the Eden 6 Travel Authority actively encourages the use of body armor and vehicle armor when visiting. What prevents Eden 6 from being just another backwater planet is the presence of the Jacobs Corporation's headquarters. Now, by Borderlands standards, where the bar for ethical weapon manufacturers is on the floor, Jacobs isn't the worst. The company doesn't have a reputation for generosity, but it also doesn't treat its workforce as disposable. Employees are provided basic care, and Jacobs has been known to take in vagrants and give them work. Still, very few ever see the inside of the lavish Jacobs Manor, making it clear that inequality is alive and well here, just like on most other planets. That said, under its current CEO, Wainwright Jacobs, things have improved, at least modestly. Wainwright has proven himself to be more empathetic and grounded than his predecessors. He was reluctant to take on the role at all, but his husband, Sir Hammerlock, has argued that this reluctance is precisely what makes him fit to lead. Wainwright can't single-handedly make Eden 6 safe, nor can he protect every employee from its dangers. But unlike many corporate leaders in the Borderlands universe, he genuinely seems to be trying. And luckily, there isn't a lot to protect from. As far as major disasters go, Eden 6 has been relatively uneventful. There haven't been any planet-wide cataclysms, just hostile wildlife and a brief stint of chaos during the Children of the Vault's occupation. So, while Eden 6 isn't an ideal place to live, it's far from the worst. If you learn to respect the dangers around you, it's possible to live a basic, stable life here. Because of this, Eden 6 earns a 6 out of 10 for livability.
Do not worry, Pandora is the 13th most important planet within our interglobal dominion. We might not spend much of our budget on you, but at least you're not on Promethea.
While the secret army of General Nox makes Promethea sound like an even worse place to live than Pandora, most of the evidence we have suggests otherwise, at least by Borderlands standards. Promethea is a relatively small planet that functions as a single massive city, and it serves as the headquarters of the Atlas Corporation. Because Atlas is the planet's primary economic engine, Promethea's quality of life rises and falls directly with the company's fortunes. As a result, the highs are very high and the lows are very low. When Atlas first uncovered vault technology and began innovating far beyond its competitors, Promethea flourished as a thriving metropolis. But after a string of disastrous business decisions and Atlas's defeat at the hands of the Vault Hunters on Pandora, the corporation collapsed and Promethea collapsed with it, becoming a shadow of its former self. Now with Reese at the helm, Atlas, and by extension Promethea, is on an upward trajectory once again, though the planet is still very much in a transitional phase. Large portions of the city remain slums. Lecture City, for example, is surrounded by toxic water, while Sidron City exists as a governmental no man's land effectively run by the Teo family's gangsters. And also, just as Promethea began to recover, two major crises threatened to derail its renaissance entirely: Malawan and Tedior. After Reese revived Atlas with the introduction of bullet tracking technology, Katagawa Jr. of Malawan's Mergers and Acquisitions division attempted a hostile takeover. Malawan laid siege to Promethea, devastating many of the city's most developed districts. Only a few years later, Susan Coldwell of Tedior escalated things even further by harnessing the power of Anahadium, slowly and painfully killing the planet's entire population. Fortunately, in both cases, disaster was averted. The Vault Hunters successfully repelled Katagawa Jr. and Malawan, while Anu, Octavio, and Fran plot-armored their way into defeating an extra-dimensional threat, using the remaining Anahadium shard to revive Promethea's people. Despite its turbulent history, Promethea is, by Borderlands standards, one of the nicest places to live. It has functioning laws, real communities, and genuine opportunity. If you want to start a business, become a news reporter, or just work an honest job as a taco chef, you can realistically do that here. At its best, Promethea is the closest thing the Borderlands universe has to a modern Western society. It isn't perfect, and living here means accepting the risk of the occasional catastrophic corporate meltdown, but if you can endure those moments, Promethea can be an excellent place to call home. For that reason, Promethea earns a 7 out of 10 for livability. Our next planet is Gehenna, which is in many ways a Pandora light. Like Pandora, Gehenna was occupied by and vacated by an arms manufacturer, except fortunately it was Jacobs instead of Dahl. The Jacobs Corporation used the planet for mining, weapon testing, and various experiments. They've since vacated, leaving Gehenna largely lawless. Luckily, frontier towns such as Vestige have sprung up, where the citizens band together to protect and provide for one another. And while bandit raids, like those from Butcher Rose's Devil Riders, and encounters with wildlife are real threats, they're minor compared to the dangers faced on other planets. Life on Gehenna has also been largely uneventful since Jacobs left. The planet did face a close call when Butcher Rose awakened and controlled a bioengineered monster called the Ruiner, but the incident was short-lived. Thanks to the Vault Hunter's intervention, the threat was neutralized, and in the long run, it may have even helped unify the citizens of Vestige against a common enemy. While we don't hear much about Gehenna after the Vault Hunter's visit, it's likely improving under new local leadership. Compared to most Borderlands worlds, the threat from wildlife and bandits is mild, global disasters are minimal, the climate is hospitable, and society shows signs of cooperation. For those reasons, Gehenna earns an 8 out of 10 for livability, making it the second best place to live in the Borderlands universe. And finally, we have Athenas, the one Borderlands planet that could honestly be described as tranquil. Originally settled as an Iridian outpost, Athenas wasn't immediately colonized by a corporation when humans settled it like most other planets. Instead, it became home to a sect of monks known as the Order of the Impending Storm. This group is devoted to nonviolence and the study of sirens, which has kept the planet largely peaceful and undeveloped. As a result, Athenas is marked by beautiful monasteries rather than towering cityscapes or makeshift settlements. And as an added bonus, the wildlife is mostly non-threatening, and the planet has been incident-free for the most part. There was a brief Malawan invasion, but Vault Hunters quickly neutralized the threat. Now, Athenas is safe enough where it has a thriving tourism industry. For some, the planet might feel a little too calm. Maya and Ava, for example, grew bored with the scholarly tedium. If you thrive on excitement, urban conveniences, or non-stop action, Athenas might seem a little dull. But in a universe where everything is trying to kill you, the chance to hike lush landscapes, explore ancient Iridian ruins, and live without constantly looking over your shoulder is a rare and precious reprieve. While it isn't perfect, Athenas offers safety, beauty, and a sense of history that other planets simply can't match. For that reason, it earns a 9 out of 10 for livability, the best you can get in the Borderlands universe. And that wraps up our rankings of the best and worst places to live on in the Borderlands universe. Hopefully future games give us a chance to explore even more worlds, though I can't promise they'll be any more appealing. Do you know which planet you would like to call home? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll force you to relocate to Elpis. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.